I stood at the gate with the funeral wreath in my hands and the house towering behind me like a secret. The driver's cars had left, the crowd had gone, and the stepmother smiled too easily at the front door. She locked the gates and turned me away. I thought of the years my father spent building that home in Beverly Hills, the nights he worked, the mornings he laughed with me. Now, at his coffin, she shut me out. My chest tightened. I wasn't a ghost. I was his child. If you're watching this, like and subscribe. Stay with me. You won't believe what he left hidden. When the funeral ended, I drove straight to my father's mansion, the same place where I had spent parts of my childhood, the same place he had promised would always be home for me, no matter what happened in life. The grief of the day was still fresh in my chest when I pulled up to the long driveway, the massive iron gates already open from the service earlier. But as I reached the front steps, something inside me tightened. The staff who normally greeted me were nowhere in sight, and the entire front courtyard felt strangely empty, like a place abandoned minutes before a storm. I held my small purse close to my body and walked toward the front door, expecting at least a quiet welcome or a moment of shared sadness from my stepmom. Instead, I found the door locked, firm, unmovable, as if it had been bolted from the inside on purpose. I knocked once, twice, then harder. No one replied. I waited, thinking it was grief, shock, anything except deliberate exclusion. When I tapped again, I heard footsteps behind the door, a faint shuffle, then the clicking of heels approaching. Finally, the door opened just a few inches, and there she stood. Perfect posture, makeup untouched, eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman who had just gotten away with something. Before I could say a word, she leaned her head forward and said, "You don't live here anymore." Her voice was calm and cold, like she was delivering a business instruction, not speaking to her late husband's daughter. She didn't ask how I was doing after watching my father being lowered into the ground that morning. She didn't ask if I needed water or rest or a moment to collect myself. She simply blocked the doorway, one hand gripping the edge as if she expected me to force my way in. I blinked, confused, thinking I misheard her because of the noise in my chest. "What?" I asked. She didn't soften. She opened the door just enough to look outside, scanning to check if any neighbors or guests were watching. The front driveway was empty, and only then did her expression shift into something smug, almost triumphant. The door opened wider, not to invite me in, but to show me something. Her hand lifted the keys, the master keys my father always carried, and she let them dangle from her fingers like a trophy. "Your father left everything to me," she said, "so you can leave." For a moment, the world went silent. Even the breeze stopped moving. My father had trusted this woman, had loved her, had cared for her, even when her attitude toward me had been dismissive at best and hostile at worst. And now, barely an hour after his burial, she was locking me out of the place he had promised would always be mine. I stepped back from the door, my body shaking from something stronger than grief. Betrayal, shock, confusion. They all tightened around me like a grip I couldn't break. She wasn't done humiliating me. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her as if she feared I would slip inside. She smoothed her dress, placed one hand on her hip, and tilted her head. "You should go home," she said, with a hint of false sympathy. Dad wanted peace in his final days. That means he wanted distance. I stared at her, trying to understand what twisted version of reality she was painting. My father had asked me to visit him almost every week during his illness. He had whispered to me things he never said to her. Things about trust, about legacy, about making sure certain documents were kept safe. He had told me more than once that some people show their true colors when a man becomes weak. And now I was seeing exactly what he meant. Still holding the keys, she stepped closer. "This place is mine now," she said quietly, as if savoring the words. "And you don't belong here." She didn't know that her arrogance, her rush to claim power, and her need to push me out so quickly were the first signs that something was wrong with her story. She didn't know that my father was far more strategic than she ever realized. She didn't know I already suspected foul play long before the funeral. She didn't know that the look in my eyes wasn't fear, it was calculation. But in that moment, I let her believe she had won. I stepped back, looked at the mansion one more time, and then turned around. She thought the locked door was the end. She thought the keys in her hand meant ownership. She thought her cold control would intimidate me. But she didn't know the mansion wasn't legally hers. She didn't know what my father and I discussed in private. She didn't know there were documents only I knew about. And she certainly didn't know this was the beginning of her downfall, not mine. When she finally stepped outside the mansion, I felt the cold air hit my face harder than her words ever could. She didn't shout, didn't look angry, didn't even look nervous. She simply folded her arms and stared at me with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they believe they have already won. I stood there on the steps, confused and stunned from the door being slammed in my face, but she didn't care. That smile told me she had planned this moment. She had waited for it, she had rehearsed it, and now she was enjoying every second of seeing me locked out of the house that once belonged to my father. I asked her why the doors were locked, why she had shut me out like a stranger, but she brushed off my words as if I were a child speaking nonsense. She said, in the coldest tone, that I was too late and that everything inside belonged to her now. She behaved as if my father's funeral earlier that morning meant nothing, as if decades of family memories meant nothing, as if I myself meant nothing. There was something so chilling in her calmness, like she had expected me to show up devastated and powerless, and she had been waiting to crush whatever strength I thought I had left. I kept standing there, watching her eyes, trying to see if there was even a hint of grief for the man she claimed to love. But there was nothing, no sadness, no guilt, no hesitation, only that cold, smug satisfaction that made my stomach twist. She didn't even step away from the doorway. She held her ground, leaning her shoulder against the doorframe like she owned not only the mansion, but also the moment itself. It was as if she believed she had the right to decide who my father loved, who he trusted, and who deserved to step foot in his home. I wanted to tell her that this house didn't belong to her. I wanted to tell her that my father had worked his entire life to build it, that I had been raised here long before she ever appeared. But the way she looked at me made me swallow every word. She didn't care about history, about truth, or about family. She cared about winning, taking control, and making sure I felt small. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with a sharpness that cut deeper than shouting. She told me that the staff had been instructed not to let me inside. She told me that she now held every right, every key, every document. She told me, with a tilt of her chin, that I should accept the new reality. I kept my jaw tight, refusing to crumble in front of her, but inside, something heavy was forming in my chest. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was about power. This was about dominance. This was about her pushing me out of my own father's world so she could replace every part of it with her own. I tried one more time to reason with her, but she didn't even bother to respond. She simply raised a hand, as if I were a nuisance, and turned her back on me. The door shut again, harder this time, and that final sound echoed through the empty courtyard, as if the house itself was rejecting me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, feeling the sting of betrayal settle deeper. She thought she had trapped me in despair. She thought she had put an end to my place in the family. She thought her little performance and cold smile were enough to break me. But in that silence, something inside me shifted. Her arrogance lit something in me, something steady, something determined, something stronger than pain. I realized she had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought grief would make me weak. She thought her power play would make me retreat. But instead, she pushed me toward the truth I needed to face. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. and the cold smile she gave me would be the last smile she ever held over me once I uncovered what my father left behind. For many years leading up to my father's death, the tension between me and my stepmom had grown slowly, quietly, and in ways most people around us wouldn't have noticed unless they looked very closely. When my father remarried after my mother passed, I did everything I could to be polite, respectful, and open-hearted. I wanted peace for him because he was already struggling with loneliness. But my stepmom made it clear in subtle ways that she didn't see me as part of her future with him. She tried to act sweet when he was around, calling me dear and pretending to care, but the moment he left the room, her eyes would harden and her voice would turn sharp. Over time, those quick glances and clipped tones created a wall between us. I learned to stay quiet, to protect my father from conflict, because I knew he believed he had finally found happiness again. Even then, I noticed things that didn't feel right. She controlled who visited the house, who spoke to him, and how long they stayed. Friends told me they often sensed discomfort in the room whenever she entered. She liked to take charge of everything: the meals, the finances, the social gatherings, and especially the conversations about the future. She always used phrases like our home, our money, and our plans, as if my father had forgotten he had a daughter long before she came along. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew she wanted to cut me out of everything, and she was patient enough to wait for the right moment. My father, gentle and trusting, didn't see any of this. He believed she adored him, supported him, and protected him. He couldn't see how she spoke for him, made decisions in his name, and pushed family members aside so slowly that no one realized they were being moved away like pieces on a chessboard. The more she controlled his environment, the further I felt from him, even though our bond remained strong. He still called me privately, still asked for updates on my life, still reminded me how proud he was of me. But these conversations were always quick, quiet, and rushed, as if he didn't want her to overhear. That always bothered me. As the years passed, my father began hinting at certain arrangements he wanted me to be aware of. He would tell me things like, "Everything important is taken care of," or "Don't worry about the future. I made sure you're protected." He never said it directly, but something in his tone made me suspect he had written a will or legal plan that my stepmom didn't know about. I didn't push him for details because he seemed uneasy whenever the subject came up, and I didn't want to upset him. He was aging, and his health wasn't as strong anymore, so I focused on spending time with him rather than asking questions that would add stress. During holidays, especially Thanksgiving and Christmas, I would see how she treated him like a prize she had won. Always hovering around him, always watching who talked to him, always making sure she was the center of his attention. When extended family visited, she told stories that painted herself as the loyal, caring wife, and they believed her because that's what people saw on the surface. But I knew her kindness disappeared the second the door closed behind guests. I would sometimes catch her rifling through his files or checking his emails, and whenever she realized I was near, she would quickly switch back to her polite, sugary voice, pretending she was organizing something for my father's comfort. When my father's health declined even more, she became almost obsessed with controlling every document, medical files, financial records, even the mail. She intercepted anything she thought could involve me, and she often hid letters that were addressed to both of us. That was when my suspicion turned into certainty. She wasn't just possessive, she was preparing for his death in a way that would benefit only her. And she believed she had already won because she was the one living in the house, managing his care and influencing every decision he made. What she didn't know, though, was that my father had grown wiser over time. He loved her, but he also understood her nature. In the final months of his life, he insisted on meeting with his lawyer privately. He told me quietly in the hospital one day, "Everything you need is in the right place." Those were his exact words, and I held on to them like a promise. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I trusted him. He had always protected me, even when I didn't realize it. What I didn't know was that he had signed documents that would turn everything upside down. documents my stepmom had no idea existed. So standing at the mansion after the funeral, watching her lock me out with a smug smile, wasn't just painful, it was the confirmation of years of silent battles. She thought she had finally won control, finally erased me from his life. But she didn't know the truth hidden behind his final decisions, and she didn't know what was coming next. In the weeks before my father died, I started noticing little things around the mansion that didn't feel right. But at the time, I convinced myself it was just stress or grief building up inside me. Now, standing outside the locked gates with my stepmom smiling like she had already won, every one of those small signs came back into my mind clearly, like warning bells I had ignored. It began with the staff, people I had known for years, people who had watched me grow up, suddenly acted cold and distant. The gardener wouldn't meet my eyes. The housekeeper avoided me, pretending to be too busy to answer a simple question. Even the cook, who used to hug me every time I visited, suddenly kept conversations very short, almost like she was afraid to talk to me. At the time, I brushed it off as grief affecting everyone, but now I know better. My stepmom had started shifting power long before Dad took his last breath. I also noticed that certain rooms in the mansion had new locks. At first, I thought it was because renovations were happening, or maybe Dad wanted to secure important documents. But then I saw the study door, Dad's private room, locked with a new keypad system that had never been there before. Dad trusted me completely, and he never locked me out of anything. I had the code to every room, every safe, every cabinet. But now, the study beeped red when I tried entering with the old code. My stepmom casually said Dad had updated security, but the look in her eyes told me it was her doing, not his. Then, small things started disappearing. My father's old leather journal, the one he wrote in every morning, vanished from its usual place on his nightstand. When I asked about it, my stepmom shrugged and said she hadn't seen it. But I noticed how quickly she turned away, almost like she couldn't hold her expression steady. His signed documents, things he always kept in a binder on his office shelf, also disappeared. When I checked the shelf one morning, the binder was completely empty. Not misplaced, empty. The files had been pulled out carefully. Each folder, each envelope, gone. That was when discomfort started creeping into my stomach. I also saw new faces in the mansion. Strangers, men in suits who claimed to be financial advisors or estate planners. But they didn't look like any professionals I had ever seen Dad work with. They always whispered in corners, and every time I walked into a room, they went quiet. One of them even closed a laptop the moment I stepped forward, acting like a child caught stealing cookies. I remember my dad asking me weeks earlier if I had seen any of his financial papers because he couldn't find a few, but when I said no, he just sighed softly, like he already suspected someone else. Now, thinking back, I know exactly what was happening. Documents were being moved behind his back, and he was too sick and too tired to fight it alone. My stepmom also began showing subtle signs of control. She changed the staff schedules without telling anyone. She instructed the driver to answer only to her. She canceled family gatherings and claimed Dad needed rest, even though he had told me he wanted to see me more. Every time I wanted to visit him, she found a reason to delay it. Doctor appointments, rest hours, medication timing. But when I spoke to Dad privately, he seemed confused and said he never asked for fewer visits. That was when I realized she had been filtering his world, deciding who had access to him, and shaping the story she wanted him to hear. And then there were the looks she gave me. Not open hostility. No, she was too smart for that. It was small things, a raised eyebrow, a tight smile, a slow glance at my clothes or my hands, like she was measuring me, calculating something. She had always been distant with me, but in those last few months, her behavior shifted from cold to possessive. She walked through the halls like she already owned the place, like she was practicing for a role she expected to play soon. One night, I overheard her whispering on the phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. She spoke in a low, urgent voice, saying things like, "Everything will be handled," and "She won't get anything." And the one line that haunts me still, "As soon as he's gone, move fast." When I stepped closer, she hung up abruptly and smiled, acting like nothing was wrong, but her hands were trembling. The final clue came the week before Dad died. I walked into the living room and found her going through his desk drawers. When she saw me, she quickly shut them and claimed she was cleaning. But the desk was spotless, and the drawer she shut was the one where Dad used to keep his handwritten will. After she left the room, I opened it. The drawer was empty, completely empty. Every small sign had been a puzzle piece, but I didn't put them together until the moment I stood outside the gates after the funeral, locked out by the woman who had planned this for months. And that was when I realized Dad had known all along, and he had left something behind just for me. When I realized my stepmom had locked me out and taken full control of the mansion, I knew I had to move fast. She was not just acting out of grief or confusion. She was acting with purpose, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. The small signs grew louder in my mind. The changed staff, the locked gates, the way she took my father's favorite chair out before the funeral. These were not small acts. These were warnings. And now that I was outside the mansion with no keys, no access, and no answers, I understood I needed to search for clues anywhere I could find them. I started by going through the items I had brought from the funeral. My father had always been a planner. He was calm, careful, and smart. He never left anything undone. A man like him would not hand over his $70 million home, businesses, or legacy without protections. So I opened every envelope, checked every program, examined every ribbon from the flower stands. I looked for anything that didn't fit. That was when I noticed something. Inside a small memorial booklet, hidden between 2 pages, was a thin card. It was not part of the booklet. It was placed there on purpose. It said nothing on the front, but on the back, in my father's handwriting, were 3 words: check the study. My heart began to race. The study. That room had always been his private space. No one was allowed inside without him. Not even my stepmom. I knew then that if anything important was left behind for me, it would be hidden there. But how was I supposed to reach it if she had locked me out? I walked around the mansion quietly, staying close to the windows. I checked every side door, every sliding panel, every forgotten entrance. And then I remembered the side entrance near the garden, the one only he and I used when we wanted quiet time away from guests. I tried it. It was locked. But when I looked underneath the small stone next to it, my breath caught. The spare key was still there. She didn't know about it. I stepped inside carefully, listening for footsteps. The house was silent. All the staff were gone. She must have dismissed them. I walked straight to the study, not wasting a second. The door was closed, but not locked. The room looked exactly like he left it. Books on the shelves, his favorite pen on the desk, and a faint smell of old paper and cedar wood. I felt a lump in my throat as I stood there, missing him more than ever. But I had a task. I had to find whatever he left for me. I checked the drawers first. Nothing unusual. Then I searched behind the books. Nothing. Then I looked under the carpet. Still nothing. I refused to give up. I searched every corner of the room until my eyes landed on the portrait above his desk, a painting of him and me from years ago. Something about it felt different. It looked slightly crooked. I lifted it, and behind it was a small hidden safe built into the wall. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization that I was getting closer. The safe needed a code. I tried his birthday. No. I tried my birthday. No. I tried the year he married my stepmom. No. My heart sank for a moment, until I remembered something. On the back of every family photo he ever gave me, he wrote the same phrase, "For my girl," and the numbers 2104. It was always the same. The date he adopted me legally. The date he said I became his daughter forever. I typed 2-1-0-4. The safe clicked open. Inside, I found exactly what my stepmom feared I would find, and exactly what my father wanted me to have. There were documents, folders, bank statements, investment papers, and one thick envelope with my name written clearly on top. I opened it. Inside were the legal papers confirming that I was the sole heir to the mansion and the majority of his assets. Everything was signed, notarized, and protected with clauses that prevented anyone, especially a spouse, from taking control without my consent. But that was not all. There were also emails he had printed out, screenshots, voice recordings, all showing how my stepmom had been planning for years to push him aside, control his decisions, and take over the wealth the moment he passed. She thought she could manipulate him, but he had seen through her early, and he had protected me silently. I stood there trembling, but not out of fear, out of clarity, out of justice. The betrayal I felt earlier turned into strength. I now had proof she had no idea existed, and she had no idea I was standing in the study at that exact moment, holding the evidence that would destroy her entire plan. She had locked me out, thinking she had won, but she didn't know my father had prepared everything for me. She didn't know the real power in this house did not belong to her. It belonged to me. I stepped away from the mansion, my heart pounding, still hearing my stepmom's smug laugh echoing behind the locked door. I walked around to the back lawn, needing air, needing space, needing anything that didn't feel like betrayal. As I stood there, staring at the windows of the home I grew up in, something caught my eye, a faint glow coming from my father's old study window. That room was supposed to be sealed after his passing. My stepmom had told everyone she wanted privacy to grieve. Yet there it was, a soft light flickering like someone had been inside recently. A chill ran down my arms. I followed the edge of the house, moving slow, careful, staying in the shadows the way Dad once taught me. When I reached the study window, I peeked in. At first, I saw nothing but shelves and furniture covered with white cloth. Then I noticed something else. The corner of the rug was pulled up, like someone had lifted it in a hurry, and beneath it, barely visible, was the metal outline of a floor safe I never even knew existed. My breath caught. Dad always planned ahead, always protected what mattered. If he hid a safe under the floor, it wasn't random. It was meant for someone, and I had a strong feeling it wasn't my stepmom. My hands trembled, but I kept watching, checking if anyone was inside. The room was still, quiet, safe enough to enter, if I could find a way in. I circled back to the garden door, testing the handle, locked tight. But then I remembered the small stone turtle Dad placed near the flower bed decades ago. As a child, I used to hide tiny treasures underneath it. I lifted it gently. There it was, an old, slightly rusted key. My throat tightened. Dad left me messages all my life. Maybe this was his last one. I unlocked the garden door and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled like old books and dust, but also faintly like Dad's cologne. For a moment, grief overtook me, but I pushed it down. I had to stay focused. I moved to the rug, lifted it fully, and there it was. The safe, larger than I expected, its keypad old but still functional. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried mine. Nothing. I tried the year he bought this house. Still nothing. Then I remembered something he told me years ago. When you don't know the right numbers, think of the right moments. My hands shook as I typed the date of my mother's death, the day Dad held me as I cried for hours. A click. The safe opened. Inside were 2 thick envelopes, a thumb drive, and a red leather notebook. I opened the first envelope. Legal papers. Lots of them. The first page made my knees weaken. Dad had rewritten his will 3 months before he died, and everything, the mansion, the investments, the accounts, the land, was left to me, not a penny to my stepmom. The second envelope contained bank statements and receipts showing massive transfers from Dad's personal accounts into my stepmom's private ones, all labeled suspiciously. Dad had been tracking her theft long before he passed, but the notebook, that was what broke me. Page after page of Dad's handwriting, explaining everything, how he suspected she would try to take over, how he knew she'd lock me out, how he planned every legal move to protect me after he was gone. And at the end, One line circled 3 times. "She will betray you, but you have everything you need to win." I sat there trembling, trying not to sob. My stepmom thought she had all the power. She thought she won, but she didn't know what this room held. She didn't know Dad had prepared for her greed. She didn't know it was my mansion all along. When I found the folder my father had left for me, I knew I could not face this battle alone. The papers were clear, the instructions were firm, but the situation around me was dangerous. My stepmom had already changed the locks, pushed out the staff who had known me for years, and claimed everything inside the mansion as hers. I understood right away that if I did not move fast, she would destroy everything my father built and erase everything he wanted to leave for me. That fear pushed me to act with a steady mind, instead of letting grief or anger control me. I took the folder, left the mansion gates, and sat in my car where I felt safe. I read every line again, making sure I understood every detail of the plan my father had set in place. He knew there would be a fight over the estate, and he had prepared for it long before his death. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and called the one person I trusted with legal matters, an old family lawyer who had known my father for decades. He answered quickly, and the moment I mentioned the folder, he told me to come to his office right away. I drove slowly, trying to calm the storm inside me. The mansion behind me felt like a battlefield I had been pushed out of, but the papers in the passenger seat reminded me that the truth was still on my side. When I reached the office, the lawyer took the folder and read through the documents with full attention. His expression changed from curiosity to surprise and then to satisfaction. He explained that my father had quietly updated his will months earlier, adding legal protections that would block anyone from taking control of the estate without verifying every detail through the executor. The executor named in the new will was not my stepmom. It was me. This changed everything. It meant she had no right to lock me out. She had no authority to remove staff, move property, or make financial decisions. The lawyer said that my father must have known she would try something, and that was why he created layers of instructions, backup copies, and legal blocks placed in multiple places. The lawyer then made copies of the documents, sent emergency notices to the bank, and alerted the estate court that a false takeover attempt was happening. Every step made the situation clearer and safer for me, and I felt the weight in my chest slowly lift. He called a trusted security advisor who had assisted wealthy families before. That man joined us in the office, reviewed the situation, and recommended immediate protective steps. He said my stepmom might panic once she realized she was losing control, and the best thing I could do was secure myself and take legal action before she destroyed or removed more things from the mansion. He also recommended that we secure digital backups of every document my father had left behind. The lawyer agreed and began scanning everything. I sat there watching them work, feeling both grateful and heartbroken that my father had lived his last months expecting betrayal from someone he had once trusted. Once all documents were backed up and the emergency filings were submitted, the lawyer turned to me and said it was time to act. He prepared an official order that demanded access to the mansion and instructed the stepmom to stop all changes immediately. The security advisor offered to accompany me when we served the notice, so she would not attempt to block us or claim ignorance. I agreed. The thought of seeing her again filled me with mixed emotions: anger, sadness, and disbelief. She had chosen greed over family, and she thought she could push me aside like a stranger. But now I was walking back with proof, legal authority, and witnesses. Before leaving, I called my father's oldest friend, a man who had known our family for more than 40 years. When I told him what was happening, he said he would meet us at the mansion to support me. I felt less alone. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe. I realized that my father had not abandoned me. Even in death, he had placed a shield around me. He had left me every tool I needed to protect his home, his legacy, and myself. As we drove back toward the mansion, I looked at the long driveway and the tall gates and remembered all the childhood memories I had made there. I refused to let someone else, especially someone who was not part of our family by blood, erase my history. I stepped out of the car with the lawyer, the advisor, and my father's friend. I felt stronger, ready to face whatever waited behind those doors. My stepmom thought she had locked me out for good, but she had no idea that the real owner, the one my father had chosen, was walking right back in with the full truth behind her. When the moment finally came to face her, I felt no fear. I walked up the long driveway toward the mansion, the same mansion she had locked me out of on the day we buried my father. The air felt heavy, but my mind was clear. My lawyer stood beside me, holding the folder that carried every document my father had prepared before he died. My stepmom opened the door with that same smug smile she had worn at the funeral, the smile that told me she believed she had won before the battle had even begun. She didn't know the storm waiting on her doorstep. I stepped inside without asking permission. The staff who once ignored me now looked uneasy, as if they sensed a shift in power. My stepmom tried to keep her voice steady as she demanded to know why I was there. I didn't answer her. Instead, I motioned for my lawyer to place the documents on the marble table in the center of the foyer. The sound echoed through the mansion, sharp and cold. For the first time since my father's death, she looked nervous. I calmly explained what the documents contained: my father's updated will, the revised ownership transfer, and the legal instructions he had secretly stored away to protect me from the very person now standing across from me with widening eyes. My lawyer handed her the letter addressed to my daughter and only my daughter. She recognized my father's handwriting and her face drained of color. I didn't need to read it again. I already knew every word by heart. It stated plainly that the mansion, the businesses, the accounts, and every major asset belonged to me. Every single thing. He had written that he feared she would try to take what wasn't hers, and he wanted to ensure she couldn't disconnect me from the home he built. My stepmom tried to argue, her voice shrill now, but the lawyer cut her off. She explained the legal clauses, the signatures, and the protections that made everything airtight. My father had signed the papers with witnesses present. Everything was legitimate. There was no loophole she could slip through. The mansion she had tried to claim, the one she locked me out of with triumph in her eyes, was legally mine the moment he passed away. When she realized her excuses meant nothing, she changed tactics. She softened her voice. She pretended to be heartbroken, confused, even wounded. She reached for sympathy, hoping I would back down. But I had seen her true face too many times. I remembered how she had stood on the porch after the funeral, arms crossed, telling me, "You don't belong here anymore." I remembered how she shut the door as if I were a stranger. I remembered her coldness, her victory, her complete lack of grief. All of that rushed back, and I felt nothing but clarity. The lawyer then handed me the keys, the old brass ones that unlocked every door in the mansion. My stepmom stared at them like they were the end of her world. In a way, they were. They symbolized everything she thought she had won. She tried to snatch them before I could close my hand, but I pulled back and told her firmly that she had 48 hours to leave the property as required by the will. Her mouth opened in shock, as if she never imagined a moment where she wouldn't be the one in control. She called me heartless. She asked where she was supposed to go. She blamed me for taking her life away. But deep down, we both knew the truth. She had built her comfort on manipulation and lies. And my father had seen through her long before I realized it myself. I told her that if she refused to leave peacefully, the court and law enforcement would remove her. She looked around the mansion one last time, the chandeliers, the staircase, the artwork, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw fear instead of arrogance. When she realized I wasn't bluffing, she broke down. She begged, she cried. She even tried to guilt me by bringing up memories of family moments she had manufactured to gain favor. But none of it worked. Not anymore. My lawyer and I turned to leave. As we walked out, I heard her voice behind me, trembling and angry, but I didn't turn around. The door closed, and for the first time since my father died, I felt a sense of peace begin to settle inside me. Justice had finally reached the mansion, and this time it was on my side. When the truth finally landed, it did not arrive with loud shouting or dramatic gestures. It came quietly, with documents, signatures, and legal orders that cut through every lie my stepmom had tried to build. I stood outside the gates of the mansion, the same gates she had locked on my face after my father's funeral, and watched everything change piece by piece. For days, she had acted like the queen of the property, giving orders to staff who once treated my father with respect. She replaced the security codes, moved furniture, and even tried to sell a few small items before anyone could question her authority. She believed she had won. She believed I was helpless. And she believed she had legally taken control of my father's entire legacy. But she did not know that the mansion was never in her hands, not even for a moment. When my lawyer arrived with the final court documents, the staff who had ignored me slowly changed their posture. The same workers who once avoided eye contact now looked uncertain, torn between loyalty to the woman who paid them last week and fear of the legal orders being delivered. The papers were clear, direct, and final. My father had placed the mansion, the land, and the majority of his assets into a trust years before he remarried. The trust named me as the primary heir, the executor, and the only person allowed to make decisions regarding the estate. My stepmom was mentioned only once, a small monthly allowance and nothing more. Everything she had tried to claim now legally belonged to me, not because of revenge, but because my father had planned it this way long before his passing. She stood near the doorway as my lawyer explained each section. Her face shifted slowly from confusion to anger to fear. She tried to argue, but every word was weakened by the documents my father had signed. She insisted that my father had promised her the entire mansion, but when asked for written proof, she had nothing. She claimed verbal promises, emotional commitment, and years of shared memories. None of that held weight against a legally sealed trust. At that moment, the power she had tried so desperately to hold on to slipped through her fingers like sand. She had locked me out of the mansion, but it was never her door to control. It belonged to me. My father had safeguarded it, even from her. The locksmith arrived shortly after the explanation ended. Under court order, the locks had to be changed immediately. I watched him remove the hardware she had installed and replace it with new systems. My stepmom stood on the porch with crossed arms, her face pale. She had no authority to stop the process. The staff received new instructions. All communication and duties would now be coordinated by me. Some of them looked relieved, others looked afraid of losing their jobs. I assured them that their positions were stable as long as they followed the legal chain of authority. This was not about punishing innocent people. This was about restoring order. The rooms inside looked different than I remembered. She had moved my father's belongings, boxed up some of his personal items, and hidden others. I documented everything through photos and notes, making sure that nothing went unaccounted for. My lawyer supervised the inventory, ensuring transparency and fairness. We recovered deeds, certificates, and old letters my stepmom had attempted to hide. Every discovery strengthened the legal certainty that she had no rightful claim to the mansion. When she finally realized she could no longer fight, she tried to turn her narrative into pity. She spoke of loneliness, stress, and the fear of losing everything. But none of that erased the cruelty of locking me out hours after I buried my father. None of that erased the greed in her eyes when she believed she had won. I did not respond with anger. I did not insult her. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated the truth. The law would determine her next steps, and the law had already spoken. By the end of the day, she had been given a deadline to retrieve her personal items before being required to vacate the property. The mansion was restored, not just in ownership, but in peace. I stood in the large entry hall, the one she had tried to claim, and felt a mix of sadness and victory. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. The win was not joyful. It was necessary. This was the consequence of her greed. Losing everything she tried to steal, and facing the world without the lies she once used as shields. After everything settled, I finally stood alone in the mansion my father had built, the one my stepmom tried so hard to take from me. The hallways were quiet in a way I had never heard before. No arguments, no tension, no fake sweetness, just silence. And in that silence, I understood the truth I had avoided for years. Some people hide their intentions behind smiles, kind words, and shared dinners, but their hearts hold plans that do not include you. My stepmom had spent years pretending to care, pretending to respect the family, pretending to honor my father. But the moment he was gone, her mask came off like it was never attached in the first place. I walked through each room slowly. I didn't feel proud or victorious. I felt tired. Betrayal drains you in a way even grief cannot. My father had trusted her at one time. He had loved her in his own way, but deep down, he must have known something could go wrong. That was why he left those hidden documents, letters, passwords, and protections for me. He didn't want me to fight a war. He wanted to make sure I didn't lose one. And in that realization, I felt a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. He had protected me, even when he wasn't here to do it himself. I thought about everything my stepmom said at the funeral, all her dramatic crying, holding on to guests, acting like she was the only one who had lost someone. But grief and greed often look similar from a distance. And now, seeing the truth, I realized she never once shed a tear for my father in private. Every expression, every hug, every trembling voice, it had all been performance. Not for love, but for control. She wanted the house. She wanted the money. She wanted the image of being the widow of a wealthy man. But she never wanted the responsibility of honoring him or the effort it takes to carry on a legacy. Winning the mansion didn't heal me. It didn't erase the fact that I had lost my father. It didn't make the betrayal easier to accept. But it gave me something stronger than comfort. It gave me clarity. I understood that protecting what remains is just as important as mourning what is lost. I understood that sometimes grief can blind us to danger, and love can blind us to manipulation. I understood that my father's final act of love was preparing for the moment I would stand alone. I made a firm decision right then. I wouldn't let what my stepmom tried to do define the rest of my life. I wouldn't let her greed shape my future, and I wouldn't let her cruelty make me bitter. I strengthened my finances, adjusted my estate, and set boundaries with every person in the family who had looked away while she tried to push me out. Silence is also a form of betrayal, and I had no room for more betrayal. I only kept those who showed loyalty when nothing was in it for them. I invited a few trusted relatives to visit. Only those who had stood by me when I was locked outside the mansion. Those who didn't hesitate to help. Those who treated my father's memory with respect. We sat in the living room he loved, not to celebrate anything, but to share memories and make plans for preserving the things he valued. If my father could see us, I knew he would feel peace, knowing his home was still filled with people who loved him, not people who wanted his money. Standing by the large window that overlooked the garden he planted decades ago, I reflected on the lesson his death had forced me to learn. Real love protects, even in silence. Greed destroys, even with smiles. And if you do not guard the things you cherish, your family, your legacy, your home, someone else will take them the moment your back is turned. My stepmom taught me what betrayal looks like, but my father taught me what quiet protection looks like. That protection became my strength. And in the end, strength is the only inheritance that never fades. I still walk through the mansion sometimes, touching the walls he built with his hands. I whisper, "Thank you, Dad." Not because of the house, not because of the wealth, but because he knew enough to guard me from someone who smiled at me while planning to erase me. That is a father's final gift. Not money, not property, but wisdom. And now, whenever someone asks me how I handled the betrayal, I simply say this: you cannot control who betrays you, but you can control who wins in the end.